Hello, folks. I'm back again, and I hope you're back again in the second of a double bill of shows today. And we had this incredibly fantastic James Holland on earlier talking about Fortress Malta, but as I knew it would, the conversation went into Burma and Mediterranean in general, and veterans and oral memories and all sorts of things, as I knew it would. But today, or rather now, we are doing a second show, and we're talking about a potential miniseries about one of the convoys that went into Malta in 1942, Operation Pedestal. So I'm delighted to present my guest today. Minda Briley is in the film industry. She's trying to get this script, this miniseries, off the ground, or rather on launched, I think is a better analogy if we're talking about a ship-based history. So I'm delighted to introduce her. So Minda Briley, how are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. So, we talked with James about the importance of Malta as a part of World War II, the center of the Mediterranean. It's to do with logistics. But one of the things that is a huge aspect of it are the convoys. James touched on that, the 1940 convoys. And then we talked about Operation Pedestal. Now, you have a direct family connection with that, and that is what we're talking about today. So for our viewers, explain a bit about who you are and where your interest in Malta and Operation Pedestal came from.
Well, I'm the granddaughter of Fred Larson, who was an American merchant mariner on one of the three American ships during Pedestal. And our family was very happy to have, we were approached about his story being written into a book. And it kind of coincides with my grandmother's story at the same time of being in occupied Norway. And so it was published in 2006. And I feel like there's a really big story here that is very visual and ready to be made into a miniseries.
Well, and so do I, frankly. So, I mean, we came in contact via Twitter, and we were just talking before going live there about the importance of using film, using TV series, using video games, using YouTube as a medium for education as well as entertainment. And sometimes, as we talked about with James, something as complicated as Malta and the Mediterranean campaign, there's a lot of threads involved there. There's multiple countries around the Mediterranean Sea. You're talking about a campaign that spans several years. But the Operation Pedestal convoy, in many ways, kind of in microcosm, kind of symbolizes all that struggle, doesn't it? It is essentially about getting supplies through to keep an island going on. And so in terms of movie making, or in terms of telling a story, that's a very simple story to tell in that regard, isn't it? We must get these supplies through because the world is dependent on it. That's a kind of a good tagline. So clearly you think that this is, besides the fact you have the family connection with it, which is amazing, it is a good story that would get people interested in this subject. But people are obviously going to want to know. They're going to ask already. So where are we with the project right now? The book was written in 2006. You've got what have you been doing to we'll look at the history side first, perhaps, then we'll look at the film side. So, you're tackling this. You're coming from the movie industry. How do you tackle turning a family story into a movie script? Tell us about the process and how you do the historical work.
Well, it's a lot of reading. It started out with this is a movie, right? This is what everybody goes to the movie theater to see, is the big World War II movie. And the more I researched, the more I realized that there's no way I can fit Operation Pedestal into 2 hours. It's just too big of a story. It's too valuable of a story to cut corners. It's too nuanced. The Mediterranean, there's just lots of moving parts from every direction, and lots of different motivations and lots of different agendas. And I just felt like a movie was not going to cut it. And so I've developed it into a 5-part miniseries. And it starts, the first part of it is getting to know my grandparents and who they are and what and why they do the things they do and how the war comes in between them, and that at the end of the day, getting home to that person that you love, your person, is the most important thing. So
and that's that we were talking before going live, folks, about the benchmark in terms of World War II miniseries is going to be Band of Brothers. It will be. It's going to continue to be. I think it always will be the pinnacle, the Sergeant Pepper, the whatever you want to call it, of miniseries. And at its core, though it talked about the European theatre of operations and covered, as we know, training and Normandy and Market Garden and the Battle of the Bulge and into Germany, it was about people. It was about people and their interrelationships and getting back home and wanting to go back, in Dick Winter's case, to a quiet piece of land somewhere. So when you're tackling something like Operation Pedestal, as a filmmaker, I'm expecting that you're kind of starting at from a different place than someone like James Holland or Max Hastings' book on Operation Pedestal came out a year ago or so, because they're trying to think, well, how can I explain the intricacies of this military situation to an audience of people who want to understand the balance of power in the Mediterranean, the need for logistics? They're coming at it from a different point, and then they would use the personal stories to flesh out the military narrative. In your case, I'm thinking your starting point is the personal story, and then it's how much of the contextual battle convoy story you put in there. Is that about right?
Absolutely. I mean, I want you to meet Fred and Minda, and I want you to be engaged with them and care about them and follow them along this like crazy epic journey that they both go on. And if you don't care about the characters, and I say characters very loosely because these are real people and this is a real story, if you don't care about them, then you're just going to click to the next channel. So, knowing that Fred Larson was orphaned as a little boy, knowing that he grew up at sea, by the time he was 13, he was on a ship, there's his brother and sister who were also served, that they were Americans, but Fred's going to fall in love with a Norwegian girl and be separated from her when the Nazis occupy Norway. He can't get in, she can't get out. She's pregnant. They're separated for a couple of years. Kind of this enduring love story that's going to last, the rest of their lives. It's important to have that personal narrative thread to follow. So why Fred volunteers to stand on the deck of the Ohio. I don't even think he really volunteered. I think he just went. I mean, he was a pretty stubborn guy, and he was ready to shoot his way to Malta so that he could get on a boat back to New York, because he got word that his wife had made it out of Norway. So he was, whatever it took is what he was going to do. So.
And that essentially, in the core of storytelling, is exactly what makes sense, because thousands of people on a convoy. I know we all know about the importance of getting the Ohio and the oil through to Malta, but people don't die for oil. They die for their loved one back home. The reason you'll want to go that extra mile is for the people around you, the crew there, the wife you're trying to get back to, the parents you're doing this for, the childhood angst you're trying to overcome, whatever it is. That's the reason people really do things. I know, again, on a military level, it's all about getting those supplies through, and I know the people involved in Pedestal would be aware of the importance of that. We must get these things through to this beleaguered island, because it's holding on, and so on and so forth. But personal motivation I think is stronger and more everlasting than kind of a military strategic motivation. I would argue that is the case there. So we talked a little bit about the history, and you were holding up your copy of James Holland's book on Malta, and there is a lot of information about Operation Pedestal, and there's people like Drakenfeld's excellent YouTube channel that talks about the strategy of the convoy. And we're, by the way, folks, we're not going to talk about Operation Pedestal and where the various stages of drama on it. That's not the purpose of today's show, but that we can do that in a future show. But we're talking about the miniseries. So you've this book was written in 2006. Obviously, that's the core central part of it. Then there's all your family information from your own diaries and information, family legends. But how do you then put that into or rather, how do you take the idea of a miniseries and get it made these days? Because that's the critical thing, is everyone's watching this thinking that the discussion the last 2 weeks has been about The Forgotten Battle, the new Netflix show about Walker, and what they do like about it and what they don't like about it. And we all agree that there's not enough good World War II movies and TV series coming out. So if that's the case, why aren't there more being made, and how do you get them made?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. Exactly. I think it's proving that there's a audience for World War II stories, that it's relevant to the younger demographic who watch Netflix, ad nauseum, who are the ones subscribing to these things, these platforms that make these films and series, and finding the right open door. I mean, it really is, finding a needle in a haystack of the right production team, the right producer, the people with the money, the actors that are interested in it, and I feel like there's going to be a quick turnover soon of new blood, because there's always success with it too. Dunkirk did super well at the Oscars. Just a few years ago, Atonement did well. Like war stories can have a draw. I think just proving the right person, pitching it to the right person is the important thing.
Well, it's coming to the point now with younger people where World War II is just a past event, like Robin Hood or the Crusades or medieval England. And for people of my age, and we talked about with James, who grew up with World War II veterans around me and talking to me, and even First World War veterans when I was a very young kid, I feel World War II is more kind of recent past. But for younger people, it is now, in a sense, ancient history. And I think one of the things is that sometimes when historians think about converting their books to the video film format, they're thinking about it maybe from a historian's point of view, and they're not thinking about it from, hang on, what are people under 20 watching? I mean, I know my analytics from YouTube is that I get almost 0 viewers of my channel under 18. Most of my viewers, and thankfully they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're people who have got have had a long-term interest in World War II history, and that's why I'm getting hundreds of views rather than tens of thousands of views and hundreds of thousands of views, because I'm talking to a kind of a niche audience. But for a World War II movie to work on the big platform, it's got to hit everybody. It's got to hit the people who are watching whatever the latest thing is on Netflix this week, last week, next, there's these Korean dramas that are coming out now. Who would have predicted that 2 years ago? Who would have predicted people would watch Norwegian crime serials? Things like that were happening a few years. So the point is, a young audience will watch anything they think is of high quality. So how do you create something thinking about that audience rather than thinking about writing for historians like the people watching me? Because it's a difficult thing, is it? Because you've got to make it appealing to everybody. So what have you done to make your story universally appealing? Or what are you trying to do, I should say?
I think that not being too serious is, I know you think like, oh, it's a convoy and people are dying and it's very dramatic and it's deadly. And, but I think that, when I read through things that these soldiers and sailors said, I mean, they were making jokes. There was levity. There was this real sense of, this might be it. So I'm going to cut a joke so we all laugh and get through the night, and this idea of not being too somber to survive on some level. And I think having characters that are appealing and flawed, and one of my main characters is Roger Hill of the Ledbury. I read his novel, it's not a novel, it's his memoir, The Destroyer Captain. And he reveals that at the end of Pedestal, they ask him to go back out, and he essentially has an anxiety attack. He says he was vomiting and shaking and sweating, and for him to reveal, I mean, that book was published in the early 70s. For him to reveal that about himself, I think is so brave, to reveal that he was frightened and that he was, not infallible. He wasn't Superman, and that's a very human response. And I think he's all the better a man for sharing that.
And that's a very modern thing, isn't it? Our heroes being flawed, our heroes, pretty much every program you're watching, whether it's Peaky Blinders or comedies, everybody's got their angst, they're openly going to their therapists and things like that. When you look at the classic era of war movies, we talked a little bit before going online about The Cruel Sea, things like that. You didn't really have much doubt that those characters were going to come through, because they seemed so heroic. They're in the American films of that era. There was maybe one character within a platoon who was a bit of an oddball, but everybody else had that kind of sense of assuredness about. You didn't really doubt they were going to get the mission done. You knew that there'd be a sort of the second act, there'd be some kind of pitfall drama, but you knew they would go on to knock out the enemy base or to get the blow up Rommel's supplied. And with Operation Pedestal, though of course we know that the outcome was just about success. They did get the oil through, lost a lot of ships, but it kind of succeeded on some level. It's hard to then add, when you know the outcome, it's hard to add that human drama into it. But at the same time, as you said there, you can add that element of self-doubt these people had. And I think that, to me, that's what must be interesting about it. That when you're halfway through that convoy and you know that Malta is X hundreds of miles away and you've already seen half the ships gone, it must have been really difficult to kind of think, we're never going to do this. There would have been a resignation to your fate. And that's I'm guessing over 5 parts, there's going to be kind of the middle bit is where it's all going to look like it isn't going to work. I'm assuming.
Sure. I mean, when the Air Force, or when the carriers turn back and they're left without air coverage, and they're literally pulling the Ohio along at like 3 knots or something ridiculous, and the sun's coming up and they can hear the hum of the planes coming their way. And I mean, there's definitely a dark night of the soul there, right? And one of the toughest things to overcome is having characters that aren't flawed and that don't have a struggle to get through. And when we have all the idea that these soldiers and sailors were just all supermen and just all got together and did the right thing and made it work, and I mean, that's a great story, but in real life they couldn't eat and couldn't sleep and were puking over the side of the boat and terrified for their lives at some point. And I mean, the book is called At All Costs, and they really did just put it all down. Like, just got to make it. There's really no turning back at any point. So,
and I guess that when we're talking about a modern audience, the idea of something being at all costs, the younger audience may not understand perhaps the context of World War II, but they will understand struggles. They will understand trying to get through something. I mean, we are globally still dealing with a pandemic that we've all had to deal with in different ways. It's been a struggle for many people I know within the history world of trying to motivation to get up in the morning when you're not seeing your friends and you can't access archives and you can't visit battlefields, all those kind of things we've been dealing with, and of course dealing with people who are actually succumbing to the disease and that horror, that side of things. Was these people on Pedestal halfway through the war, they've already lost people in convoys. They've already lost brothers and sisters that have been killed in the Blitz in London. They've seen battles been lost. They're carrying all that baggage the previous 2 years. There's a lot of human torment there. But at the same time, there is this idea of it did work. You've got this victory, a semi-victory at the end. So, but getting back to how and what one gets a TV series made, you've got a script. We're in an environment now, particularly in the USA, where people love that sense of patriotism. The support for our veterans has never been greater, even though your country, like Britain, like France, has got a divide about politics. The love of the veteran has never been higher. The love of kind of that element of the positive about the patriotism. It seems that it's a fertile time in which to kind of capitalize on that. So what's the process to get this from the paper to the screen?
Well, part of my pitch is that this is a history lesson for Americans. They are not terribly well versed in Mediterranean World War II, first of all. And that, I mean, Americans have a sense of, we showed up, we took care of things, we made it all work, and they forget that the war was going on well before Pearl Harbor. And that the Merchant Marine, and my grandfather was a Merchant Mariner, is a part of this war that is completely not represented in cinema on any level. I mean, when you ask an American about World War II merchant mariners, they're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's just American World War II movies are exclusively about the armed forces. And they just absolutely ignore the sacrifice. I mean, the Merchant Marine was such a huge target in the war. And I just feel like this is a really important story, not just about my grandfather, but about how the Americans joined forces with Britain. I mean, this is one of the very first convoys that they did together. And there are these 3 ships that were kind of commandeered and sent over. They were volunteered. It's all of our history. So in the American World War II Merchant Marine were just this past year given the Distinguished Service Medal, and were only given partial veteran status in 1988. So they were, promised a lot in the heat of the war, and nothing was ever given to them. They did not get the GI Bill. They did not get all the benefits that other veterans made. And the U.S. Merchant Marine have the highest casualty rate. I mean, if you were working in an engine room 40 feet below the waterline and your ship was hit, you were gone. And I think these guys deserve the light of hero to be shown on them too.
Well, I agree. And the thing is, in a sense, the merchant mariners and including the British merchant navy as well, they're kind of they're not only they're the unsung heroes, but they're also the underdog to a certain extent. And when we go about the type of film that is happening about the US forces, you're never really portrayed as the underdog. As you said there, you come in and you get the job done. And we had the Tom Hanks Greyhound film last year, which was all right. The novel was much better. And as I said to you before we went live, I love Stephen Graham down in the engine room there, but I felt it was all a bit, it could have been a lot better. But it felt a bit again that I didn't really feel that Tom Hanks was ever going to really not come through. I felt that it's Tom Hanks, of course, he's going to prevail. I didn't have much doubt watching that. And I think Americans would need to kind of be reminded that there were periods in the war where it wasn't necessarily going our way. I think that doesn't maybe. So when we talked with Michael Nyberg last week about Vichy France and talking about America has to kind of confront some of its darker periods of the fact that it recognized Vichy when the Britain didn't in 1940, and Americans are much more accepting of our paratroopers went on one D-Day. We were the only ones who did our bit at Market Garden. We we did the island hopping, we defeated the Japanese, and being reminded that America was part of an allied cooperation, I think it's very important. But how do you sell that to movie makers? How do you sell that to producers who have the purse strings to get something like this made?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I think that personally, my grandfather would be mortified to ever be portrayed as, you know, the single reason that this convoy was successful, the only reason that, you know, the Ohio made it through. If I had pitched it that way, he would have said absolutely not, because he was very aware that he is just one tiny cog in this giant convoy, and that his life was not any more valuable than anyone else's. And I guess that's the part that makes him a hero, right? that that he knew that his decisions had consequences. So again, I think that human element to these historical films and series is paramount. I mean, again, if you don't care about the characters, you're not going to watch. I mean, even in Squid Game, you have to like the characters on some level, even the detestable ones, so that the stakes are raised for if and when they all die, right? Like, if you don't care, then why are we even watching? So, you know,
it's complicated because there's a kind of a paradoxical element here, and to sell it, you've got, you know, the at all costs is a brilliant title. You know, we've got to get this through at all costs. But then again, a lot of movies set in World War II are, this is the thing that changed the course. Without this, I mean, the new Operation Mincemeat film with Colin Firth that's about out now, I'm sure it'll be pretty good because it's a great cast. But most historians will agree that dropping of a body to try and convince the Germans we were going to Greece when in fact we weren't was actually not that important in the grand scheme of things. As ingenious as the idea was, as inventive as it was, as much of the drama and the body and the Spanish and all that, it actually didn't change the outcome of the war on any level at all. But with the Operation Pedestal, I think you'd struggle to argue that this didn't change the outcome of the war. If that oil hadn't got to Malta, as James said, Malta was on the brink, as he reinforced the idea of how stretched the medical facilities were in Malta at a certain point in the war, is that the Ohio getting through with the oil, even if the majority of people in the world haven't heard of that, is one of those points in the war where it changed things. And I think we can all agree, most of us watchers can agree on that. So that when you're if you can get the difficulty I see for you is getting into the offices of the people with the money and giving them the pitch, because how many pitches do they come across their desk every day? How many scripts turn up by courier at all these big studios daily? So what are you doing right now, and how can we watching this, how can we help you push this idea forward?
Well, you can follow At All Costs on Twitter. You know, if I have a following, it gives it value, it gives it strength. Really anything World War II gets momentum moving forward for everybody else's projects. If you know Tom Hanks, throw this his way. You know, Steven Spielberg. Really, I feel like there are not a whole lot of people producing these movies and stories. But if you find the right one, you're in pretty good hands. So personally, I have the pilot episode pretty much done. I have the other ones, pieces of them written, but the outlines are all there. The story's all developed out. You know, I've got pitch materials. I've got a little pitch video ready to go. you know, having IP, having the book published already is, so I'm told, helpful. The publishing editor for the book, his name is Peter Riva. He's actually Marlene Dietrich's grandson, and he was the one. He's a big World War II buff, and he's the one who approached our family about producing the book. He's done wonders in helping me, given me permission to move forward with, using the property rights. And so I don't know, just shouting from every mountaintop how important I think the story is. And, working with, I've met a couple other on Twitter. I've met a couple other writers who are also working on World War II stories. One is John McRitchie. He's got a great PQ-17 story.
Okay.
And he's also the grandson of a World War II merchant mariner. So he's a great guy to bounce ideas off of.
So, I mean, the people watching this, I mean, there'll be more people watching it on repeat later on, but these people they're members of all sorts of military forums and Facebook groups and Twitter groups and study groups. So I'm sure if everyone's watching today can go and share this with at least one resource that they use, it just helps get that word out there, because this is the thing we said earlier, is that we're all, those of us have an interest in World War II kind of on a daily basis, are crying out for more films, for more TV shows, for more books. Are no problem. Books are coming out all the time. But the thing is that, as we talked about earlier, there's an entire group of people on this planet who don't buy books. They don't watch YouTube documentaries. They don't listen to podcasts. They want to be primarily entertained, and if something comes their way that they think has a good story, as we know from Squid Game and these Norwegian things, people will watch anything if it comes with enough decent writing and and frankly publicity behind it as well. And getting World War II stuff off the ground is really tricky, and yet we know, as you said there, when they do hit, they hit. I mean, Dunkirk, 1970. I know that's First World War. This Operation Mincemeat film, I'm sure, will do well. Forgotten Battle, which was a bit flawed, but I interviewed the producer last year, but I think it was one of the #1 films on Netflix for the 2 days after it came out. What was it, Saturday before last? I've been out there about 9 days now. So there is an audience for this. People are interested in this. It's a question of these companies being bold enough to give people like yourself who've got an idea, at least hear them out. At least I think if you get into people's offices and can pitch this to them, if you can get to that stage, I think you've kind of won half the battle. No pun intended. It's the problem is getting into the room, isn't it? That's the eternal difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, there's the quandary of gatekeeping. I have to pitch this story to the people in the basement, right? The first line of defense are these readers that come in and read these scripts, and they're usually young. They're usually, is history something they're looking for? Finding the right door to knock on is hard. And it's a lot of research and reading articles and seeing interviews with people and getting names and looking them up and sending emails and, do the best we can.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. And, I think as I said, we can all agree it's definitely a project worth moving on. So I think we'll leave it to people to kind of work their magic. I mean, I never know. They always say they never know who's watching your shows. I was told years ago that Tom Hanks participates in all sorts of military forums online, but anonymously, because he can't go in as Tom Hanks. So maybe he watches my show. Maybe he listens to James Holland's podcast. I've no idea. Maybe Gary Sinise is out there, and because we know there are people who are interested in the path. They are interested in showing off what that generation did. And as we talked about with James, we are on the brink of losing that generation. We need to remember what World War II, how important it was in shaping the world we live in today. There's all sorts of universal themes that come out of this, because Operation Pedestal, as you said, was truly international. There was people from different countries. They're coming from different reasons. Malta, in and of itself, is a truly international location with influence from North Africa and Italy and the British Empire. And so this could be universally appealing. It shouldn't be just a narrow, only people from one country would be interested in it. I mean, there was a Norwegian series about the heavy water plant there, and it was big in Norway, but it didn't kind of go much outside because it was seen very much as a Norwegian story. But this, as we talked about, Malta is truly international, so I think it should work. So people are saying on the sidebar there, they're beginning to follow you on Twitter, they're looking for you on Instagram and things like that as well. So we've got the ball rolling. But right now, I just hope that when we bring this to an end, we can be talking in a couple of years' time about having you on with the first member of the cast and the director coming on and saying that we've started filming. That would be really good to think that this right now is just is the beginning, not necessarily my show, but this week something's happening behind the scenes, and we will be talking about this as an actual concrete go ahead miniseries as opposed to a brilliant idea, which is what it is right now.
I like where your head's at. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, we'll leave it at that. So, okay, so folks, the At All Costs promo video on YouTube is in the link below. Minda's Twitter account is in the link below. If you've got any questions, if you can't get contact with her, send a message to me and I'll put you in touch. And if you're watching this and you are a Hollywood producer and you've got 100 million sitting in a drawer that you've already paid your tax on, you need a project, please get in touch because it's a brilliant story. And I know there's people here watching this who maybe have connections with associations and naval associations and merchant mariners, so that maybe they've got some links for you or some recommendations or some names. So anything you can do, folks, to assist will be greatly appreciated by Minda, I think. So
absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, I'll just remind people what we're coming up tomorrow, and I'll come back and say goodbye in a second. So, folks, tomorrow's show is at the earlier time of 5 p.m. UK, and we're talking about Turkey's rather confused role of being neutral in World War II with Onur Izzi, who's a Turkish historian and it's going to be fantastic. Turkey had a complicated relationship with the Soviet Union and the Third Reich, and indeed the Allies. And I'm sure that most of you watching don't know much about Turkey in World War II, as I didn't before I read the book that Onur wrote, who's coming on tomorrow. So 5 o'clock UK time tomorrow, and it's a different time on Wednesday. I think it's normal time. Thursday's an odd time as well because Richard Hammond is available at different times. So just basically keep an eye on the times this week. And of course, we're in that era where various countries are changing their clocks at different weeks. So just keep an eye on the schedules and make sure you know what time the shows are on. As usual, don't forget to check us out on Twitter. Think about becoming a patron. Share what we're doing on social media, and the same applies to the At All Costs details we talked about earlier. So right now, it just meant to say thank you very much, Minda, for joining us, and let's fingers crossed we've kind of got a little ball rolling, and someone's watching this who's already tapping out an email to you. That would be great, wouldn't it? And if something does happen, please come back and tell us about it. And I look forward to having a show with you in 2 years' time when you're deciding which actor you're going to have play your grandfather. That'd be really cool, wouldn't it?
Well, thank you so much. I just really appreciate you lifting up these voices and lifting up these stories. So just really appreciate it from me and my family.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. So brilliant. And thank you very much for joining us. So, folks, this is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV. I will see you all again tomorrow. And I hope you enjoyed that double bill today. And thank you for watching, because without you watching it, it would all be a bit pointless. So thank you very much. And I'll enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.